Guten Morgen, everybody. My name is Fredrick Boholst. My 20-minute presentation is on the science of psychobiography. This will be basically an introduction given the limited time. And I chose to title it Like All Others, Like Some Others, Like No Other. The caption basically refers to the three levels of generality conceptualized by Cloughan and Murray in their 1953 dictum when they said, every man is in certain respects like all other men, like some other men, and like no other man. Well, that was 1953, and I think there was no issue then of political correctness. If I may rephrase it to fit our politically correct expressions nowadays, I would be paraphrasing it as every human being is in certain respects like all others, like some others, and like no other. Again, this refers to the levels of generality in the study of human beings. While the original conceptualization was about how research has three certain levels of generalization, in my own experience, I can pretty much relate the same dictum to my experience in the world of clinical psychology as well, which I will later on elaborate. Human beings are like all others. This basically refers to the nomothetic view of doing research wherein, for instance, evolutionary psychologists search for general principles that capture commonalities of human beings, genetic predispositions that all human beings share, the need for survival, the need for stimulation, the need for, of course, food, heritability of certain diseases. This is the aspect of research that desires generalization, that desires to extract universal principles, universal theories, for example, that can pretty much explain the human condition. Even some psychoanalytic principles, behavioral principles, cognitive developmental stages, or the instinct for language, such as Steven Pinker's desire for language, would be at this level of doing research and understanding human beings. However, the second part of the dictum goes like that all human beings are like some others. So from the tree of generality, from generalizing to what can be considered as a universal, we go down to the level of comparative psychology, because some people are, yes, like all others, but they're also like some others. And this basically refers to the differential view of human condition, in the same manner that there are generalizations that can be made not in the global sense but only within the person's group membership. For example, for instance, males generally are different from females in certain respects, such as at the age of 3, for example, girls have over 200 more words, new vocabularies than their counterpart boys. Filipinos basically differ from Singaporeans. The class A differ in their choice of philosophy and fashion when they're compared with the level C in terms of socioeconomic standing. The Malays differ from Caucasians. Generation X individuals very much differ from their Generation Y counterparts. Catholics largely differ in terms of the desire for progress than the Protestants. The latter is more progressive, by the way. But so there are these two levels that we can pretty much look at human personality, human motivation, and make generalizations within their group membership. But if we backtrack a little bit, and we are all, I suppose, social scientists, if not psychologists here, and if we examine our motivation for entering into the field of psychology, I, for one, had wanted to understand myself, understand why my dad behaves the way he did, why my mom behaved the way she did. And I bet you, as a psychology student, if there are students around here, one of the reasons why you entered into psychology is to understand yourself. I usually kid my students. I crack jokes with my students sometimes and tell them that the very reason why they are into the field of psychology is because once upon a time they were psychologically disturbed. Something disturbed them. Why one's uncle or aunt behaved in the way they did. And this desire, more often than not, propelled us into taking up psychology, reading psychology books. But then again, we enter into the field of psychology, and as an undergraduate statistics, I study statistics and I study human behavior, and then I go like, where am I in the mathematical mean? Oh, that's behavior. You have to add all the scores there together, sum it up and divide it by the number of students, and there you go. That's the average. That's subjected to further analysis. And then I go like, okay, that's the average aggression score, but where am I in the mathematical average? Oh, you're somewhere there. We have measures of dispersion, which we call standard deviations, and then I go like, where am I in the standard deviation? And then my professor says, you're somewhere there. Standard deviation is some sort of a measure of error and how we are spread out away from the mean. And years of studying statistics and research and multivariate statistics, I got nowhere close to understanding myself. So I said, there must be a different level of understanding the individual. And it is only in the third level of generality that my questions could be looked at, because all human beings are like no other. And this is what brings us to the ideographic as opposed to nomothetic method of doing research, wherein we are not as concerned as making generalizations to the larger population as to the generality within an individual. So we are looking at now at the ideographic and the subjective level, the phenomenological experiences or patterns within a person, such as understanding a person's reasons for acting in a particular way. We can never, use multiple regression models to understand an individual's reason for murdering somebody, for example. For instance, a very simple question of why did Van Gogh cut off his ear? I don't think we can understand that from the nomothetic point of view. Sure, we can look at schizophrenia, delusions, and repression, but why did Van Gogh cut off his ear and give it to a prostitute? This is where the third level of understanding human personality comes in. Because Van Gogh, Vincent, was a man like no other man, and it is only within the context of his narratives and life stories that we can better understand his rationale, his reason for cutting off his own ear. Or why did Sylvia Plath kill herself? According to Schultz, we can only understand that within the context of psychobiography. Or what is the psychology of the Reverend Martin Luther? Why did he, for instance, nail his 95 Theses on the door of the cathedral when he declared his protest against the Catholic Church? Or why did he twisted and turned in the choir loft and said, "Ich bin nicht," this is not me, I am not, until the rest is history, when he he spurred the Protestant movement. It requires psychobiographical analysis. Or what is the evolution of the mind of Osama bin Laden? These individuals have been studied, but not much light has been shed on their individual dynamics by using nomothetic research. Yes, we do benefit from nomothetic research in terms of general trends and general patterns and path analyses and in terms of, doing structural equations modeling, which we should do. But at the level of the individual's life story, it is the third level. A human being. It's like no other. It is when psychobiographical research finds its niche. How about Bill Clinton, the past US president? Why did he marry somebody who resembled his rigid, highly intelligent grandmother? And why did he allegedly have an affair with somebody who resembled, even at the facial level, who resembled his own mother? Very interesting questions there, which can never be answered at the level of the nomothetic research. Or in my particular case, for example, I had a patient once. He was a colonel in the army, and he was admitted to the psychiatric ward because he had been seen saluting at the C-130 plane for hours and hours and hours. He would gather his people around him and he would command, hand salute, and everybody salutes and everybody looks at each other. What are we doing here? And then, they just drifted away, left him behind after 4 hours, and then suddenly he cries, and then nobody knows. A chopper airlifted him, brings him to the psychiatric ward, and then diagnosed with major depressive disorder with a psychotic episode. And then I go there as a psychological intern, and I read his files, 150-page thick files, because he had been there for 10 months. And I never understood, after 150 pages, I never understood what it was all about. It was only when I began interviewing him during group therapy, for example, and when I asked him, why the salute? And then he says, well, I'm gonna tell you if you salute with me. And then I invited the whole group and then we all saluted, and then I go like, come on, tell us your story. And then he says, oh, I see somebody, I see a coffin. I see the coffin of my father being brought down by the cargo military plane. And then he sobbed and cried, and his story came out. Cut a long story short, he was basically abused as a child. His father was a general in the army, and but he idolized his father nevertheless. And then when he grew up, he entered into the military after becoming a doctor himself, a medical doctor. And and he tried to establish the bond that he lost of being abused as a child. And when he was about to succeed in reestablishing the bond of the father, immediately at that, the father died, suffered a major heart attack, and he suffered major depression as well. And then the father, in a full gear military ritual from the C-130 plane, the coffin was carried down, and 21 gun salute, and the whole ritual. That was the story. After 9 months in the hospital, he was discharged, and then he went back to duty, and then he was reassigned to another commanding officer whom he described as elderly, gray-haired, fatherly, gentle, understanding. Then you don't have to be a psychologist to figure that out. He was looking for a father figure then, and he established the bond again with his new commanding officer, and all of a sudden, boom, massive heart attack. The commanding officer died, and then he suffered another major depressive disorder with psychotic episode, and then he saluted at the C-130 plane again, by himself, alone, fantasizing, hallucinating, and that was the story. I never understood that story after 150 pages of psychiatric files. It is only in the third level of generality that we will understand the individual's human behavior. So psychobiography is the study of storied lives. It's the study of an entire life from birth to death, with the aim of discerning, discovering, or formulating the central story of the entire life. But Schultz even said that no, we don't have to have a blow-by-blow account of the historical events of the person's life. We just have to select certain prototypical scenes in the life of the person that might shed light on his current functioning. So in my early research, I interviewed a well-renowned neurosurgeon in our country here, the Philippines. And it didn't take us more than 30 minutes to ask him why he wanted to be a neurosurgeon when he's not earning that much. And then I asked him whether there was something very salient in childhood, and then he heaved a sigh, and then he paused for a few minutes, and then he said, when I was a kid, my parents told me to take care of my 6-year-old younger sister, and then we were running around and my sister fell. She suffered a brain injury. She died on the spot in front of me. You don't have to be a psychologist to zero in on that as a prototypical scene that might just explain why he became a well-renowned neurosurgeon in the country. So this is the meat of psychobiographical research. We try to look for patterns. We try to look for probably even a psychological theory that might shed light on an individual's functioning, and explain, not at the nomothetic level without much desire to generalize to the larger population, but maybe to generalize within the individual. Maybe we could count the number of times he did something, and maybe extract from these examples certain personality generalities within the individual person. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to give you my own, I'm not going to talk about my own research, but I would like to add on that being a qualitative research, psychobiographical research, is not any less quantitative than nomothetic research. In my own research, for example, I use statistical techniques to extract a person's patterns, a person's themes, a person's cognitive maps. And this is a map, for example, of a person who was sexually abused by an uncle, and this is a factor analysis of that same person, and this shows an evidence, for instance, that he had indeed, for example, forgiven the uncle because in the factor structure in his own perceptual map, the uncle, which we found here, correlated with a weak person. The factor they shared in the same factor, not with a bad person, not with an enemy, not with a person he doesn't like, but with a weak person. So this is a part of psychobiographical research that makes the study of the individual psychology very, very scientific, as well as scientific as when you gather a group of people, run an experiment, expose one group to the experimental independent variable, measure differences between the control group, and so on and so forth, control for internal validity, threats, and that. I think psychology as a science should also take a step backwards and not just mimic what scientists do, but emulate what they do. Freud, for example, Jung, for example, Skinner, for example, Piaget, for example, even the father of psychology, Wilhelm Wundt, for example, although he was called by the American Titchener as a structuralist, I don't think he was a structuralist. I think he was a gestaltist. I think he was, because his students even called his method as Ganzheit, and I think you can better translate that better than I do. And he was studying individual persons, not grouping together people, computing for the mean and seeing reliable differences and looking at trends and correlations and patterns. Don't get me wrong, I have a deep respect for the quantitative tradition. I teach multivariate statistics. I teach multiple regression, discriminant analysis, and so on. But for the purposes of this presentation, the third level, human being is like no other, is where psychology is where psychobiography finds its niche in the realm of understanding individual behavior. Danke schön. Thank you very much.